if you're Macy's, we have almost as many people that we're tracking going to your stores as you are seeing at your website. Odds are that our audience of people that we're seeing physical are maybe overlapping 30% with your web audience. So here's a huge audience of people who are your customers that you don't have data on, that like actionable, immediate, like they were shopping yesterday type of data on. If you retarget those people, just like you're retargeting your website visitors, you will get the same return on ad spend. That plays out all the time. So any brand that has a physical footprint, their opening move should be to say, listen, I want to, in addition to I'm retargeting people on my website, I want to retarget people who go to my store.
You are listening to Power Marketing with Kevin Lee. Kevin and his agency Did It have helped thousands of businesses win through superior marketing, as have his books, articles, speaking engagements, and the eMarketing Association Power Marketing podcasts. Here's Kevin.
Super excited about all forms of marketing that have high intent. So search obviously has been at the core for me for ages, and geography, in particular geography that relates to shopping environments, tells you a whole lot about an individual. So that's why I'm super excited to be chatting with Ezra Doty today, who is the CEO and founder of Quorum. So let's start with your origin story. So what was the catalyst for you deciding, okay, let's go ahead, let's do this?
Yeah, well, I was thinking a lot about this, like when did it actually begin, the thinking about, user targeting and all this stuff. And it really goes back pretty far. My first real job was, in 1996, I worked for an internet consulting firm, and we were basically solving for the fact that like web servers didn't have the notion of state. So figuring out how keep track of click paths and that kind of thing, until Netscape in 1997 came out with cookies and changed all that. But even at that time, we were working with companies like Flycast and New York Times and Campbell Soup, and it's been top of mind for me for the beginning. And I went from there then to Philadelphia Inquirer, Daily News, at a time when we were building this Yellow Pages product, which is kind of like a city search. I don't know if you remember way
Sure.
back then, but the mapping functionality was provided by Zip2, which was Elon Musk's first company. And they were reinventing classified advertising with the launch of cars.com. So kind of getting into, and they were using Net Gravity as an ad server, and it's all super early and new, and always, again, to me, just super interesting. And then that interest continued as when I went to Turner Broadcasting in '99, where we were innovating piggyback progressive downloads on low bandwidth, for video content on low bandwidth, and doing some targeting with MyCNN. They had this version of their site where you could customize what kind of articles you wanted on your homepage, and we would target based on the registration data. And where it really started to come out, an interesting thing at that time also was that my wife worked, or my fiance at the time worked for Ask Jeeves. So here I was in this kind of more traditional television driven media environment. And then I would go and hang out with these people who were really focused on, what, became search advertising, keyword based stuff and performance metrics and everything. And it was interesting to me that they were both advertising, but still so completely different. It was always interesting to me as well that even just going back to the Inquirer and Daily News, how much of the revenue came from classifieds and those big circulars in the middle, and how much of it really was driven by kind of hey, let's get in front of the people who are ready to buy type of advertising, combined with the broader reach brand stuff. Anyway, I've been a bunch of other places. Everyday Health, I was there, and figuring out data driven publishing, which was really cool. But I've taken a step before that. Revenue Science was really the place that kind of piqued where it all started to come together. We were, I think, ahead of its time. But basically, the concept was really not too different from publisher first-party data, clean room kind of strategies today. Is the Wall Street Journal has out of inventory on their biotech section, but they have all this run-of-site inventory. Those users go to all kinds of other pages. Let's activate that biotech visitor as first-party data and continue to target them throughout their experience and get a better premium on the run-of-site. It's a win for everybody. And they did sell that product reasonably well, but ended up shifting more towards the buy side, just because I don't think the market was ready for it. So it's wild to see, clean rooms coming back and like the whole concept reemerging so much time after when we saw it. And at that company, we also created, I was able to experiment with things like retargeting people who had been to an automotive website that was a premium automotive site on AOL for like $1 CPM inventory, and seeing that like, hey, this user who has expressed interest and intent recently online is clicking through on these ads at the same rate basically as they are in context, but the cost of that inventory is much lower, and there's hardly any constraints on it. So yeah, there was a lot of moving around, a lot of time thinking about data and targeting. And in my last corporate job was with Universal Music Group. We created a network of artist websites. They said, hey, the music industry is doing horribly. Like, can we sell some advertising? Like, because at the time, I think it was like 2006, things were not going great. So we stitched together a network of artist websites, showed that we could sell ads. And right around the time that was getting traction with marketers like McDonald's and AT&T and T-Mobile, Microsoft, we got a call from Hulu saying, do you guys want to throw your music video content in with this? And we were able to take a step back and say, hold on a second, maybe we could do this on our own in combination with YouTube. And that was the beginning of Vivo. And that was my last corporate job. And like the whole time I'd always like been like accumulating experience, thinking like, I'm going to go out and I'm going to start a business. And I'm like, the guys like you who just like came out of the gates doing it, it always impresses me. I always felt like I needed more, skills or whatever. But then I reached that point. I was like, look, it's now or never. We got to do this. And so I started a company called, it was called Echo Search Media at the time. And our whole idea was we were going to create a secondary market for search. So back then, when a person would click a Google search result and get to your website, it was passed in the query string, the keyword that they used. And so what we were doing was getting onto pages that were getting a lot of inbound traffic for high value keywords, and collecting those keywords and cooking those users and basically creating a secondary market for search terms. I'm glad we got away from that, because like it wasn't too long after that they shut that down. But but during that time, some friends of mine had been at DoubleClick, and they shared with me the RTB spec, and I knew that was going to be a game changer. And so we were like amazed at the granularity of data, the whole notion of being able to bid, on one impression at a time was just, and to have the audience targeting combined with what about the context and everything else, it was a game changer. And I was really fortunate to be starting my business at that time. So we built a DSP around that, dynamic creative engine, kind of similar to Criteo really, that we sold to a company called dealer.com in Burlington, Vermont in 2013. And I went on to run their advertising division for the next couple of years, while they were subsequently bought by DealerTrack and then Cox Automotive, which also owns Kelley Blue Book and Auto Trader and all these things. And really it had ended up being kind of like Criteo for car dealers, and is still active across probably 3,000 or 4,000 different car dealer websites. And that really got me into local. like I thought I understood, the automotive business. I thought I understood the difference between national and regional and local and tier two and all this stuff. But really, when you're having to manage campaigns or have technology that manages campaigns, basically you can't cost effectively do it without technology, have enough people. It's just much different. Managing one $500,000 a month campaign is just a lot different than managing $1,000 a month campaigns. Like you can hire a small team to handle your $500,000 a month budget. It doesn't scale. So we were automated in terms of like all the optimization and the dynamic creative and everything. It fit perfectly. And it really showed us a lot about like the power of local, because we watched budgets peel away from tier two and things that were less efficient, and go right to the granular level where where everybody wanted to spend the money. Everybody wanted it to be more efficient and in the control of the dealer. So once you figure it out for automotive, by the way, a lot of people don't think of it as retail, but it is actually the largest form of retail. And it can be like whatever you learn there immediately extends onward to to any other brick and mortar business, really. So I finished with that in 2016, and then I took a minute, and then I decided, and I went to a conference in New York. I went to an ad exchanger conference, actually, and I was like, what am I going to do? I've been thinking a lot about augmented reality. I've been thinking a lot about like associating data with points in space. Like Pokemon Go was a thing at the time, and AR is obviously becoming more and more in something people are thinking about. And I knew I wanted to do something with it, and I had lots of fun thinking about that, but I couldn't come up with anything that was really like, okay, this is going to be a business. So I went down to an ad exchanger conference, and I was like, well, maybe I'll network with some people and learn something. And it's been a while. And I had learned two things at that conference. One was someone explained to me the addressability and the scale and what was possible basically with SDK based mobile app data and location data. And I had originally thought about like the version that was there with the telcos, and how it was triangulated within a mile. It wasn't necessarily addressable. And so that was my perception of it. Someone explained to me, and this is 2018, hey, this is a scale. I said, well, how much scale is here? And they were like, I don't know, probably 150, 200 million at the time. And I was like, how long has this even been a thing for? And they said, well, maybe since 2017 at that scale. And I just knew that was a big opportunity at that time, right when I happened to be looking for what's next. So I started Quorum, and we focused originally on the out-of-home space because there's other people in the location data space. Wasn't sure exactly like, how it was going to go. I had a learning curve ahead of me. I knew a lot about local, but it was getting into something new. But we figured we could build enough differentiated features in out-of-home to basically provide, store visit attribution. A person drives by a billboard and they go to a store, that type of reporting, in a way that was competitive. And from there, really, the business has grown quite significantly into all forms of targeting based on where people have been. Really, more than anything, we're a targeted advertising company, and we're the focus is taking this data of, hey, this person did something recently. They were just at a Home Depot. They were just at a car dealership. They were just at a restaurant across the street from yours. This is a person that's more likely to respond to your advertising for that reason than the people in a 10-mile radius, all the other people in a general 10-mile radius or in the zip code. So let's focus on them. And that targeting has really become our core business, along with attribution, which we started in out-of-home attribution, but now we've expanded to CTV and display attribution as well for store visits. And yeah, that's
So, so what a lot of people don't realize that, there's a few different slices of ad inventory that are consumed on mobile devices, with regards to display type advertising or video type advertising, and that, the general browser ad calls are quite different than the SDK delivered ad calls that are from within an app. And then even when it's SDK delivered ad calls, it's different depending on whether it's an Android device or an iOS device. So can you so the people understand the process, like, I'm at the Burger King, or I'm at the Honda dealership, or whatever, or I'm at the K Jewelers in the mall.
right.
And to the extent that that's the pin that gets put into my anonymized identity, or maybe not anonymized identity, but in any case, there's sort of like, now we know that about me, right? And then how does that end up getting used differently in those three contexts? Because my understanding is that the regular, browser type ad call doesn't transmit that long, and so it's a lot different in the way that the level of precision is not there, and of course, so it's a different kind of an ad opportunity than something that's an SDK based ad opportunity.
Yeah, for sure. In the beginning, we looked at different forms of this type of data, and certainly considered what they call bitstream data, which comes from the browser. And we did find it to be very hard to resolve to normal things, that a very small percent was accurate enough to be used to know that you did this or that. Yeah. And then the difference really with SDK based is that it's as accurate as the blue dot on your phone. When you're looking at your phone and you see where you are, it's not perfect. Sometimes you're on the other side of the building or whatever, but it's pretty close.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the degree of accuracy we have with SDK based. And the way it works is really it's all opt-in and it's all anonymous. So for example, if you go to the App Store and you look at the New York Times app, if you just go to their page in the App Store and you scroll down, you'll see that it's disclosed to you that in exchange for using this, which is that app happens to be paid, but in exchange for whatever, you are agreeing that you're okay with your anonymous data being shared for advertising purposes, and an included type of data is location data. Mm-hmm. And so what we get in the simplest, rawest form is what we call pings, which are mobile device IDs, like an anonymous made mobile ad ID, and a timestamp, and lat long coordinates. And that's really it. And per user, who has an app with these permissions installed on their phone, we see about 50 pings per day on average. And so those pings come out at random at whenever the app says it's a good time to send out a ping. So a parking spot finder app might send out pings while you're using it. A weather app might only send out a ping when you change your location by more than a mile. They're all a little bit different. Mm-hmm. But you can have multiple apps on your phone, and so basically these pings are coming out all different times of day. And we have also a geofence or polygon map where we've gone out and we've drawn polygons or geofences around every major place that you can think of, that would have a sign on it, like every Home Depot, every Lowe's, every McDonald's, every car dealership, every AutoZone, every Macy's, like all different types of retail, and then other places such as ski resorts, golf courses, things that theme parks, things that would indicate like lifestyle or other types of that might be useful to an advertiser. And every day we don't know where they're going to be or if the ping is relevant, just like such a huge percentage of Google searches are not really relevant to any advertiser. Tons of places where you've been are not that relevant to any advertiser either. So It's our job. We really act as a refinery to crunch through those raw data feeds from all these different apps that we license the data from, to figure out, identify the consumers who have been at an Advanced Auto Parts or at a car dealership or whatever that would be potentially interesting to an advertiser. And so we crunch through all that data and we store it all in a decentralized way at the location level so that it can be used for definitely for store visit attribution in reporting. But our main focus is to kind of take all those little chunks of data, someone was here or there, and figure out ways to to re-aggregate that into audiences that we through statistics and math can figure out basically that this is the right combination of people for you to target based on what we see as their behavior. And that's the gist of it.
Yep.
I don't know if I want to restart that or not. Is that okay? Is that okay?
That's fine. Is it a lot different as to what is transmittable from the SDK when it's an iOS app or an Android app? Like if it's the same weather app on the two different devices, are there significant differences? Assuming that people went through the same opt-in process, in agreeing to the terms, which in some cases may be more overt and require more of a affirmative opt-in, and in some cases maybe it's a little bit less affirmative. But in any case, they did agree to the terms. Is it pretty much the same? Like the ad call has the same information in it, whether it comes from a weather app on an iOS phone versus an Android phone?
Yeah, it's the same. They both provide a lat long, the GPS coordinates, a timestamp, and an anonymous ID. And I should say that recently it used to be that there was like varying degrees of how people collected opt-in, consent.
Mm-hmm.
That really changed a lot, I think, with Apple iOS 14.5. More than anything, they standardized that opt-in process. It used to be that you could opt in here or there or in different ways, and everyone we got data from prior to that did assert to us, that they had gotten that consent. But when it switched to iOS 14.5, their privacy nutrition labels made it, there's no way you couldn't understand. And Google Play has followed suit with that approach as well. So I feel like we're in an age today where the consumer really understands better the value exchange for their data and the free content and services that they're benefiting from. I haven't checked in a while, but it used to be that Yelp would monetize it. I think they were like $7 a month per user. And so if you nobody wants to, maybe some people do, but most people don't want to pay $7 a month for Yelp. You have this kind of understanding that look, they're using your data and that's the deal. That's what pays their developers and their content people and all the rest of it. And you have a right as a consumer. You have a right. It's fully within your rights to not use Yelp. It's important that you understand that this is how it works, and that you certainly do have. There's all kinds of opt-in features within these iOSs now to help you opt out if that's what you want to do or manage those settings. But fundamentally, if you are against the whole concept, you do have the right to not use that. So I feel like we've come a long way in terms of that, and just to be super clear, we don't collect any personally identifiable information whatsoever. We don't associate any anonymous mobile information with any personally identifiable information. It's just a complete no-go zone as far as we're concerned. So yeah.
So what's fascinating about it is obviously the sort of my history, assuming that I've been perfectly happy to share it with an app, and the app is then sharing it with you guys. Different signals have different value, right? So the fact that I'm in market for a car is quite different than the fact that I visited a Burger King or I visited a florist, right? So competitive conquest during the during the automotive shopping experience is huge, right? Because if I went to look for one SUV, you won't know that it's an SUV, but you'll know I went to a Toyota dealer, right? So Honda would love that, right? Maybe BMW and Lexus would like it as well, depending on, if they're trying to change from one price point to the other, right? So I can certainly see huge advantages to competitive conquest in certain industries. And then within other industries, I can see it perhaps being a little bit less valuable. So which industries does there tend to be a lot of longevity to the signal, right? Because longevity of my visit to the Burger King, like, unless it shows that I visit Burger King every Thursday, right? Is it super valuable to know that I went to Burger King? But auto, I would imagine, is super valuable. Maybe some other categories are super valuable.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting how much variety there is in terms of like how it's used and the different strategies that go into it. So just to talk about a couple of those that you mentioned, automotive is obviously a power, if you're, I'll compare it to search, right? If you're focused on a scarce number of people who are in market typing in Toyota Camry lease deals near me, right? And for any time someone raises their hand and says that, you want your ad in front of them. Like, you might cut all of your other advertising, your very last advertise, but you're going to be closed before you cut like that. Like, you always want to be in front of that person who's ready to buy. Serving an ad to someone who is just at the Honda dealer across the street from you produces the same KPIs. It's just as effective. And so that's a huge strategy for car dealers and for all of automotive. Then when you go into restaurants and stuff like that, it's less about like you're not intending on a huge purchase or something like that necessarily. But what's interesting is that to consider is that it's actually a category where there's not that much online information, right? No one's really going to people do go to the Burger King website or whatever, but they're not poring over the content to make their drive-through decision, right? Like they go there occasionally. So there really isn't a lot of online data for those for that type of for those consumers, or at least around that type of product. And so for us, what we look at is we say, okay, so you were at Burger King. We'll run a scan. We'll say, all right, so here's all the people that were at this Burger King. We're tracking hundreds of thousands of other locations, getting close to 1 million locations now. Where else did I see customers in common? And so that Burger King, if we identify that there's for one location, there's a Sonic drive-in across the street that has 20% overlap with them. But for another Burger King, it's a Wendy's that has a high overlap. And for another Burger King, it's a McDonald's or whatever. For each of those locations, we're able to pick the next best conquest target, and that's really really honing in on convenience, right? There's a built-in affinity there. If you're getting heavily cross-shopped with a business, it means there's something that you have in common with them, whether it's you appeal to the same type of consumer, or whether you're just like convenient. It could be any number of reasons, but that type of convenience targeting is incredibly effective for restaurants. And again, restaurants who are really working on limited data to begin with, there's just not a lot out there beyond demographic information.
Right.
And then another example, though, is people who. The interesting thing about automotive, by the way, just to take a step back, is that that's a finite thing. Like, after about a month and a half, you've bought the car. Like, if you've been to a dealership, you've bought it. And so we have to, just like with website retargeting, you have to be careful about how long do you keep that window open for. And with automotive, it's not a huge window. One interesting thing about car shoppers, though, is like when you start to look at the cross-pollinate, cross-shop activity, whatever you call it, it's a heavily credit-driven purchase. So you'll see a lot of correlation between people shopping for cars and maybe shopping for furniture, right? Once you get your car, and a lot of times the car purchase is all intermingled with a home purchase. You've got your credit to the best that you can possibly be. You've made the biggest purchase of your life. Okay, now you're going to upgrade your car. Now you're going to get some furniture, and all this stuff often happens at the same time. And we're able to see those relationships and build audiences around those dynamics as well, which kind of like leads me to thinking a little bit more about, home improvement stores like Home Depot and Lowe's. those are homeowners, right? I mean, for one thing, right off the bat, if you're going to Home Depot or Lowe's, you might go occasionally if you're renting, but the vast majority of those people are either homeowners or professionals. And the other interesting thing about those home improvement stores is that the people who are making up the bulk of traffic are people who are usually in transition, right? They're either buying or selling a house. I go to Home Depot personally or Lowe's 1 or 2 times, maybe 3 times a year when I'm not in house selling mode. But when I'm in house selling mode or I just bought a house, I'm going to be in there 3 times a week for months. And so that is valuable on a number of different levels. You've got a lot of people who are going to buy products that are, they're going to buy flooring, they're going to buy furniture, they're going to buy paint, they're going to buy all different types of stuff. So very valuable for that. Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of there's plenty of other examples.
Yeah, it's super fun to think about.
Yeah.
When you can get creative with this, right? How the creativity can manifest itself, not from the creative and ad, but strategic creative. In other words, would I be able to come to your team and say, listen, if a person goes to Lowe's, Home Depot, or another lumber yard more than 3 times a month for more than 2 months in a row, I want to create that audience because they're probably a contractor or a plumber. Right. And because I'm targeting those types of individuals, that's who I want to turn into an audience.
You could definitely do something like that. And you can even, let's say you were ProServe and you had a retail location, right? And that you were looking for these things. We could run a scan and we could say, all right, of the people who go to ProServe, what else do they do? And we can just identify within that cohorts of like, oh, your customer is their behavior is to go to home improvement stores multiple times and they stop here and there, like the stuff you were describing.
Mm-hmm.
Will just surface on its own. And that's true for any brand. And that's really kind of, I think a unique thing about our approach is that we're not really prescribing anything. We're looking, yes, there's like lots of things that intuitively make sense that you could try. And if you want to use our data to do that, you're welcome to it. But we find that if we analyze the behavior of your customers in relationship to all this other stuff, and we're open to like whatever else they're doing,
mm-hmm.
we find things, patterns that make sense when you describe them, but aren't necessarily the things that are top of mind when you're working on your media plan.
Right.
Yeah.
So how much of the data ends up being useful from a discovery perspective? Because the way you described it just now, it seems like you could float to the surface some learnings from a lookalike perspective that might end up giving you the aha moment, right? As opposed to coming in with a preconceived notion of what your customer is, that you might actually learn something interesting, like, the folks that always use the analogy of when you do research in a grocery store that, diapers and beer end up in the shopping cart at a high level of frequency together, right?
Right. Yeah. The way we start things off with most of our clients is we run a scan for them. We in most cases we already have their locations mapped.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll come to us and we will run the scan and we'll say like, okay, of all the people who went to your Advanced Auto Parts, here's where else they went. Of all the people who went to your AMC movie theater or your HEB supermarket, whatever it is, here's all the other places. We ran a scan across it's about 800,000 locations that we're tracking right now. And we figured out that you have the most cross shopping with this store or that store. And by the way, here's how busy those stores are on a relative basis. So you can say like, look, if I've got 200 overlaps with a Walmart, that's good. That's okay. But if I have 200 overlaps with a smaller bit with a Whole Foods, then that's like, okay, then there's a lot more interest, like, because it's on a relative scale, it's a larger concentration of cross shop activity. Distance is another factor in that, right? Like, hey, if someone's if there's a high overlap percentage from someone who's pretty far with a business that's pretty far away, that's a strong signal. Someone's willing to go out of their way. And so we give all that back to the advertisers. Like the second that's the beginning of it. We're happy to provide those insights, and we provide them in as granular a form as they can be consumed, because, and it's always interesting. Like I've never talked to a client who wasn't kind of a little bit surprised about like how different the cross shopping behavior was, or how different their scale was in terms of store visitation relative to a competitor, and how that varied market by market, and even within the market on this side of town versus that is totally different. And it's really useful information for, from the broader context of planning of the strategy. It's
Right.
definitely new insights about the consumer.
I can certainly see it's super powerful for the brands or retailers that have in-store presence, right? Or selling through a retail channel. Do you have any folks using it from a DTC conquest perspective? So, for example, I've got Truth Nutrition, which you see behind me, right? Which is nutritional supplements.
Yes.
I build an audience of folks who had visited gyms and yoga studios, for example, separately, and say, all right, let's run these ads against people who visit yoga studios frequently, and these ads against people who visit gyms frequently. And of course, I don't have a footprint in either a yoga studio or a gym, but it may resonate with my audience, right? Those may be people who would be, interested in hearing about my product.
Yeah. That's an awesome use case. I'm glad you brought it up. Definitely, you could target GNC, Vitamin Shop, people who go to those stores where they're actually selling products that are in your category,
right? And
it's super effective. Like the return on ad spend for that is really good. It's very comparable to finding a keyword that's going to work for you, and search. These are people who are leaning in and shopping for what you have to offer, and it's super effective.
So
go ahead.
I was going to say, you talked earlier about sort of the attribution side of things as well, right? Because when there's a store footprint, you're trying to understand not just who should I target and how should I target them, but did it work? So on the attribution side, how does that end up working?
Yeah, the attribution side is definitely interesting, but I do have one example that I want to talk about on the targeting side.
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
We mentioned is and because there's a variety of strategies. So we talked about different advertisers, but really it just breaks down to the following strategies. There's retargeting. If you're Macy's, we have almost as many people that we're tracking going to your stores as you are seeing at your website. Odds are that our audience of people that we're seeing physical are maybe overlapping 30% with your web audience. So here's a huge audience of people who are your customers that you don't have data on, that like actionable, immediate, like they were shopping yesterday type of data on. If you retarget those people, just like you're retargeting your website visitors, you will get the same return on ad spend. That plays out all the time. So any brand that has a physical footprint, their opening move should be to say, listen, I want to, in addition to I'm retargeting people on my website, I want to retarget people who go to my store. And no, you don't have the granularity of product level information and all that, but for whatever reason, maybe it's lower funnel. Maybe the people have, because they've gotten off the couch and they've gone and actually been to the place. It's a little bit stronger. I don't know, but the return on ad spend is always comparable. The next strategy is obviously conquesting, right? So like Macy's, well, let's talk about Meta, for example, for a second, right? Within Meta and walled gardens, the opening move for someone like Macy's is retarget people who went to your website. Now, there's only so many ads you can serve to that person, right? There's a limit to it before the return on ad spend math stops working. So what do they do when they build their lookalikes? Well, they've got their pixel on every website that's out there, right? So they will look and they'll say, okay, well, what websites that we're tracking have the highest overlap with Macy's? They'll say Nordstrom has 20% overlap. So what they're putting into the lookalike model is people who went to the Nordstrom site, and those people who went to the Nordstrom site, they were probably even bidding on the same keywords, right? Macy's probably lost out in that keyword bid. They ended to Nord, and it performs just as well. So we do the same thing in the physical world, where we'll for each individual Macy's, we'll say like, okay, this Macy's you want to target the Nordstrom across the street. For this Macy's, it's actually a TJ Maxx. Whatever it is, we build those same type of lookalike audiences just based on physical, real world behavior. And so conquesting is obviously big. Lifestyle targeting, I want to target somebody who is at a ski resort or a golf course or an amusement park. You can think of like lots of use cases around that. And then convenience targeting, we have a unique way of tracking when people are driving past a point in space. It started with billboards, but focusing in on people who are within who are, it's just an easy right-hand turn to hit your drive-through. We did an analysis. It was actually Burger King that we looked at, and we compared the visitation rates of people that we saw driving by the Burger King to the visitation rates of people who were in a 10-mile radius of that Burger King, which is more typical targeting strategy. And the people who were in our subset, still within the radius, still geo-targeted, visited 14.5 times more often. So before you even serve an ad, you're 14.5 times more likely to get a prospect with that type of convenience targeting. It depends. That's not true for every type of product. Some things are obviously more considered. You're not going to buy a car purely based on convenience, but it's definitely an interesting approach. And then the other form of targeting, obviously, you can amplify. If you are running out of home advertising, you can amplify and target those people on like CTV or social or display, however you want, and really get a 1-2 punch type of effect out of that. Which if you don't have to Google much to look at, there's tons of research out there that says like, hey, there's a 1 + 1 = 3 thing happening here. So we make that easy. Those are some of the.
Before we get into the attribution, then one follow-up question to that: are any segments big enough where you would actually want to run a specifically different creative, right? So for example, this is something somebody probably wouldn't respond to, but let's say that you see that the person, visits the Burger King way too much, and you're thinking, well, they're probably overweight, so we should give them a weight loss ad. Right? But then, and there's so many Burger Kings that means there's so many people who, might be in that audience. So do you actually craft an ad specific to that audience, not saying, you ate too much Burger King, but at least knowing something about them?
Yeah, it actually, we actually have a lot of people who want to target, like in the automotive industry, people want to target the employees, the techs who work there. They're trying to recruit, they're trying to hire new people, people to work at their dealership. So we definitely set up audiences like that. Like, look, this person isn't shopping for a car. They're there all the time. They work there, or they work in this store or that store. Yeah. So targeting employees is definitely a strategy that works the way you're describing. Yeah, for sure.
Right. So on the publisher side, how do you end up sort of collaborating with the publisher? You're sort of breaking through the walled gardens to some extent. So they can pass you some information, I guess, in the ad call other than lat long. Does that end up being useful targeting information as well? Obviously, to the extent that what app it is, weather app versus Yelp versus fitness app, well, it might be useful. But is there anything else that gets incorporated into an ad call that's useful?
We're sending mostly audiences based on what you've done recently. That's been incredibly effective for Google, and there are tons of other signals out there, like their demographics and psychographics and all kinds of interesting things about what you're browsing online, context of what you're interested in to some extent. But the results of targeting based on actual, hey, I'm out there shopping for something, or I just typed in this search term, are orders of magnitude better than any type of demographic or kind of inferred or model type of approach. So we don't really add anything else to the mix other than that, like, look, they were just here and you should give that a try, and usually it works out. Yeah.
So to calculate the ROAS, obviously, if the person's not consummating the purchase online, you have to essentially model the fact that they did in fact buy that car or that furniture or whatever the case. Or are there ways to sort of anonymously tie together the purchase behavior that is occurring?
Yeah, there are ways to do it, and we, through partners, provide the data if they want to take it to a deeper level of research, and match it up with other data sets of exactly what people bought. We can provide the data for people who specialize in those areas, in, let's say, CPG or in automotive or whatever. And along those lines, we do provide store visit attribution reporting, but you can use our audiences and your own store visit attribution reporting and whatever other attribution makes sense for you.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, if you're targeting the right people who are ready to buy something, it's going, like, the tactic of working with this audience or another, like such as your website retargeting or your first party data, whatever it is always just going to bubble to the surface, no matter how you're looking at it on a relative basis. It's, if you're on the right track, it'll always on a relative basis surface. So yeah, and in a lot of cases, honestly, we're just we know that they're looking at it. We expect that people are looking at these things in a variety of different ways, and they have their own KPIs. We're happy to provide KPIs if it's useful, but really, it's just about getting, just like when you run YouTube ads and they're targeting the person who is on your competitor website, similar to like the way Meta works, right? Just when you see those clicks coming in, you're getting something.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to be getting something, with whatever audience is actually working, right? You just kind of go with that. And yeah, and then in the publisher world, so just so you know, like how technically how it works, was we build these audiences, and we deliver them in a lot of cases through LiveRamp and now from the publisher world, then those can go into like GAM, or Google, and all the different DSPs, but they can go to Google Ad Manager and all the different CTV platforms, or wherever you're running the stuff. You can just grab the audience we send you and add it to a campaign. Publishers can also create deal IDs that are maybe their run a site inventory that's focused on a particular audience type. For example, you've got a lot of run a site inventory, you have a limited amount of home improvement contextual content. We can give you an audience of shoppers who have been to a Home Depot or a Lowe's or a Menards or an Ace or whatever, and you can package those together with your run a site inventory and sell it at a premium to run a site, or just use it to bundle in your to move more run of site, because it's ultimately going to work better.
Yeah, it's high intent inventory.
Yeah,
it sounds like it would make particular sense for agencies who are used to dealing with this. Although you don't have minimums, I would imagine there's sort of a sweet spot where once a person's spending up, beyond X per month on non-search advertising, that it starts to make more sense to layer you guys into the mix. So is there a particular sweet spot where all of a sudden people should be considering this?
Yeah, I think that, for businesses that have a physical footprint, I think, you should be looking at minimum $500 a rooftop, up to $2,000 or $3,000 a rooftop per month,
mm-hmm.
Which is really similar to search. Honestly, when I was at dealer.com, we worked with thousands of search. We had thousands of search customers, and we had churn. It was a huge business. Google actually came into this analysis and they said, listen, the number one churn factor, the thing that all the people who are leaving have in common is that they're all spending less than $500 a month. And then all the people who are the most sticky they're all paying over $2,000 a month. And at first we were like, okay, I guess you would say that, but it really makes a lot of sense, because when you're selling cars, you're investing probably $200 per car, in search to get one sold. And, if you sold 3 extra cars and you've got 200 cars in your lot, you're not going to feel it, right?
Yeah.
And people can be provided all the reports in the world and all the KPIs and whatever, but if now on the other side, if you change that budget to 5,000, you sell 30 more cars a month,
right?
Forget it, right? You don't need a report. You're like, this is what we're going to do now.
Yeah.
And that happens. And so it's not that it doesn't work at lower scales. It's just
can't measure it. Yeah.
The effect. Yeah. And we can measure it. We can measure it. We can tell you it's working, right?
I know.
But it's much better if it registers in however you're used to thinking about it.
Cool. Well, it sounds super exciting. What has you excited over the next year?
Well, we're growing a lot into CTV. That's becoming a much more vibrant landscape. I think the dollars are, there was a lot of dollars that went with like the rush of eyeballs to these platforms, and that was kind of like easy money. But I believe that many of them are beginning to realize that they're competing with YouTube at the end of the day, and they have way better content. Nothing against YouTube, but like it is kind of mind-boggling that this a video skateboarding dogs and stuff like that gets higher CPMs than studio produced content, right, in Hollywood. And why is that? Like, and why is that true with Meta on happy birthday posts, right? It's because they're targeting people. They've got their pixel everywhere, and they're targeting based on behavior. Anyway, what makes me excited is the idea of CTV video advertising, high quality inventory being focused in a similar type of way to produce, I think, even better results and way better brand environments, and with all the extra benefits of the adjacency and everything else that goes along with it. It's just great to see people, the first wave of adoption having happen with like the broader kind of upfront type of purchase mentality.
Mm-hmm.
How do we shift that? How do we shift that thinking, right? And have like a bridge type of thinking. Yes, we do our upfronts and our seasonal buys, but we also have an always on component, right? Like, there's a certain number of people who are just constantly raising their hand, just like you're constantly, buying ads against that audience in YouTube. You should also be buying it on Yellowstone or whatever, right? Like on something in more places, just alone in more places, regardless of whether or not they're higher quality. So I'm excited about the media industry really starting to think about, doing both. There's challenges to it, like if you're a publisher, I think that you don't want to sell on performance. It kind of runs counter to like the ethos. But the funny thing about most publishers that I've worked at is the second a deal is sold, they're running back to the ad ops person saying like, hey, can you make this work? And it's like, well, we can, and everyone's trying their best to get the renewal. If you layer in data like ours, and other sources of data, you can get those renewals. Like whatever they're looking at, you're, like I said before, you're going to bubble to the surface. Yeah. So those are the types of things we're thinking about mostly.
Yeah, well, that's super exciting. All forms of targeting that have high intent data tend to be the ones that don't get shut off during any recessions that might happen. So from that perspective, I think you're in a good place. Thanks so much for joining me. Look forward to watching your continued evolution over the next year.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me.
Kevin Lee's Power Marketing is available on all your favorite podcast networks. Kevin loves helping businesses excel at marketing. Having marketing challenges? Just like Santa in The Miracle on 34th Street, if Kevin can't help you, he'll know someone who can. Find him on LinkedIn, subscribe, or follow.